When I first started podcasting, it sucked. I sucked at podcasting. And I sucked at all content, email content, social media, things like that. I wasn't necessarily crushing it. And you may be in the same boat or you're looking for a way to do even better. So this isn't just about podcasting. This is about newsletters. This is about blogs, so on and so forth. Now, to give myself a little credibility here for you, me and my teammates built up the Barbell Shrug podcast. When I left in 2018, we started in 2012. When I left in 2018, we had 200,000 YouTube subscribers, 250,000 people on our email list, and we were getting over 100,000 downloads per episode. So I know what I'm talking about. So if you're running a podcast or putting social media posts up and you don't get a lot of feedback, your download numbers aren't very high, they're not really moving up, your show is about nothing and everything, hint, you're not Joe Rogan. This guy's a professional comedian, been on TV, and then he transitioned to podcast. Of course, he's going to be good there. Another thing, if you don't know where you're going to end the show before you start it, that's also maybe a sign that you're in this suck stage like I was. And you don't have any consistency or a very clear focus. So these are like signs that your stuff may not be working the way you really want it to. And the good news is it's very easy to fix. So one of the reasons that most podcasts suck, because I get introduced to podcasts all the time. Usually when people refer them, they're really great ones. But I've also been invited on a lot of podcasts where I was like, ooh, that's a little bit of a rough one. They've got something to learn there. And so one of the beautiful things about podcasts that I love is that it's so easy to do. Like if you have a laptop or even just a phone, you can do Zoom calls, record them, make podcasts. So the barrier to entry is really, really low. And so I've seen this over time as an entrepreneur. There were businesses that the barrier to entry is low. Anything internet based is really, really low barrier to entry. That means it's really easy to start, but that usually means that other people are also in there, and there's a lot of other people starting and operating their thing, and so there's a bit of a noise to work through. And so the issue with podcasting is a lot of times people think they're going to be really good at podcasts because they're sitting around with their friends, they're having conversations, and they think their conversations are awesome, which they may be awesome conversations. But when you get in front of a microphone, there's a start time and end time and all that mess. And you start thinking about, all these other factors that come in when you're podcasting. Now your conversation isn't nearly as natural and it doesn't come across the way you want it to, and the audience isn't really receiving it. And this is a really common thing you see in comedy. I'm a big fan of comedy. I'm lucky enough to be living here in Austin, Texas, where it's the comedy mecca of the world. And one of my favorite podcasts to watch is Kill Tony. If you don't know about Kill Tony, I highly recommend it. There'll be at least one moment per show, if not several, where it's cringeworthy, but it's a good discomfort. But on his show, on Kill Tony's show, he allows amateur comedians to just sign up to do 60 seconds. And one of the really common things that we get to hear from people who try it out, who bomb, who suck, is Tony goes, he can tell, he goes, you're pretty funny around your friends, right? People tell you you're funny. Is that right? And 9 times out of 10, someone that gets up and bombs and they go, yeah, I'm the funny guy in my friend group. And he's like, well, you're on stage now. This is different. And so it's very similar to podcasting or making Instagram reels or whatever it is that you're doing. I personally like long format better than short format, and that's one reason I make these YouTube videos. But I think it's a thing that happens in podcasting too. It's like, oh, we sit around with our friends, we have awesome fire conversations, and we should be recording this and sharing it. But then when you put it out, it really doesn't land because the audience doesn't really know you. They don't have the greater context that your friends have. And you may be hanging out for several hours and then you have a 30-minute conversation that's really awesome. And so these are things that a lot of people don't think about. because one of the things that makes it like can trick you is if you watch Joe Rogan, it seems like he's just hanging out, but the guy has got thousands of reps, tens of thousands of reps, having conversations that are interesting and then presenting information. He's unconsciously competent in the area of having interesting conversations. I'm going to teach you how to do the same thing because I figured what I discovered at episode 42 of Barbell Shrugged is something that I continued to repeat for over 1,000 shows. And once I did that, once I got, a couple hundred under my belt, now that's how I carry on conversations in public. And, that's how I think about podcasts. It's conversation in public. So one thing you want to keep in mind, if you haven't started a podcast or you're new to it, is you want to keep practicing in public. Just like I remember when I was competing in jiu-jitsu and weightlifting, there were a lot of athletes who would want to get 2 years of practice under their belt or training before they showed up to a competition. And they were really good training, but they really weren't good at competing. And it's because they weren't practicing competing at the same time. So I think about that in regard to posting your podcast, posting your social media stuff. Don't just write it or think about it. You actually have to put it out because there's something about putting it out and getting that feedback that allows you to get better even faster. So the other thing I want to encourage you to do is to post at least 50 episodes, because I think that like less than 10% of podcasts ever start make it past episode 20. Think about that. Not very many. A lot of people want to start podcasts. A lot of people do start podcasts and they don't finish. They don't complete. Probably because they get to about episode 10 and go, this is hard. A lot of people don't get past episode 3. Various reasons, I'm sure. So I've had several different podcasts over the years and I've done hundreds on each, and it's been fantastic. But I say commit to posting at least 50 episodes. I've also seen this I have some clients who are Instagram influencers, and a lot of them will tell you that the thing that made them successful is they said to themselves something like this. This is a common story of, I just decided to post something every day for 90 days or 100 days or something like that. It's not that far out. It's not like a whole year. I've seen people do a whole year. They say, hey, I'm going to make an Instagram video or I'm going to make a YouTube video every day for a year. That's almost guaranteed to have success, by the way. I don't know anyone who has put out content every day on a single platform and didn't experience some type of success. All right. So that can be the hardest thing for people, especially if you have this, if you think, well, I'm not an expert, or you have some self-doubt or whatever, you're actually going to work that out as you're posting. That's how you get over it, is actually by posting the stuff. If you're waiting for the self-doubt to go away before you start posting, it's never going to happen. And so post at least 50 times. If you're committed to Instagram or you're committed to Facebook or whatever it is, 50 days in a row of the thing, and you're going to be really, really surprised. If you're doing podcasts, you might do 1 or 2 a week. So you may be committing to a whole year here. When we ran into this episode 42, we did 1 a week. So it was about our 42nd week of doing podcasts. Now, it was 2012, so we didn't really need to be amazing in order to have listeners, because there weren't that many podcasts out there. But once we stumbled across this information and we utilized it for the podcast show, I started getting messages. I remember episode 42 went up and I started getting messages from people. I got feedback. Now, I had gotten some feedback prior to that people enjoyed a guest or this or that. But when we did episode 42, I had multiple people reach out and said, that was the best show you've done so far. That was amazing. And I go, oh, wow. And we had put I'm calling it the story stream structure. That's what we created. It's not necessarily anything that is revolutionary. A lot of people have a structure for how to tell a story or how to have a conversation or how to teach something. What I did was I took bits and pieces of things that I learned. I combined it into one that I found it worked really, really well. And so I got all those messages on episode 42, and I go, well, it might be a fluke. This just might be a fluke. I don't know if it's actually good. We're going to stick with the structure that we created. So we did it for the next show. Messages again. Best show you ever did. And then the third time we did this structure and we used it for the podcast, we got the feedback again. Best show yet. And to be honest, I was a bit resistant to actually putting structure in place. One of the things I really liked about podcasts is like I can just hang out and do whatever I do. But sitting down for 15 minutes beforehand made a huge difference. And I found that it helped create more confidence in myself. So every time I got on the microphones before a podcast, I would be nervous. And then when we had a structure in place and we actually made a plan before going into the show, I had more confidence going in. So if confidence is an issue, this will help with that as well. And then, of course, getting feedback to the show is amazing. That helps a lot. So here's my story stream structure. It goes like this. There's 5 different parts of your show in this order. There's the why, there's the who, there's the what, there's the how, and there's the what if. Now, if you've read Simon Sinek's Start With Why, then you know a bit about what I'm talking about. It's not the same exact order as he does, but the main premise of his book is start with why, and that way you can get people bought into the conversation in the first place, and then you can lead them down a path that keeps them engaged, adds credibility to what you're saying, makes what you're saying believable, so people are listening to you. They see you as an expert in whatever it is that you're talking about, whether you have a guest or not. And so I'm going to break down each section for you. So the first section being the why. This is where you start. This is all about grabbing the listener's attention. You have about 10 seconds, man. If I hold up my app, I'm using my phone to record right now. If I hold up my app on Spotify or iTunes podcast, whatever, there is a million different podcasts for me to listen to. So if I don't do a good job of grabbing someone's attention in the very beginning, not going to happen, right? They're unlimited. So start with why. Now, what is the why? So why is the benefit the listener is going to get from listening to the show. Now, this applies to all posts. Start with the benefit they're going to get. What's the problem they want to have solved? And talk about it. And actually tell them, hey, I remember with barbell shrug, it was like, you're going to be able to squat more weight. You're going to be able to have a bigger barbell snatch. You're going to be able to run a 5K faster. You're going to lose weight, right? So we start with the benefit of what they're going to get. Those are really general and vague ones, but just using it as an example. And you can get really good at this. So you can tell at the beginning of this video, my why. I'm going to give you examples about this video because I'm using the structure right now. My why for this is your podcast might suck. So anybody and someone goes, oh, that's a problem. Maybe I have a podcast. Maybe I'm thinking about starting a podcast. Maybe I'm not podcasting, but I have some other content. Maybe this will help me out. The benefit is by the end of this, you're going to know how to podcast better and you're going to get more listeners, yada, yada, yada. So I started with why. You start with the why as well. This motivates the person to stick around. It grabs their attention and motivates them to stick around. And then we move into the who section. And so this adds a layer of credibility. So if you have a guest, then this is where you ask them about their background. You ask them about their experience and whatever it is they're talking about, their academic background, basically why we should listen to them, right? And so I a lot of times we may get deep into the who. So any of these sections can be really long and any of these sections can be really short, and it's going to depend on podcast to podcast or post to post, how long each one of these are. You may have a huge who section. And you may notice that like as you get better at this, like for myself, as I've gotten better at this, a lot of times I'll build in little stories about myself throughout a newsletter or a YouTube video or something like that. And because I'm doing that, it's like people are getting a little bit of who all the time, but I also do start off with who at the start. So if you don't have a guest, you can talk about yourself but I would keep it short because if you have listeners for 50 shows, you don't need to tell everybody your life story on episode 1. You can just drip it out, right? And the benefit to that too is if you do solo podcasts like what I'm doing right now, or people are learning about you little by little, they're gonna eventually want to know a lot about you, and so they're always wanting to listen for more. That's how you create a raving fan. So after the who, after you embed the credibility, and one thing I want to mention about the why, I'm gonna go back to the why real quick, is if you can talk about the problem better than they can communicate it. So if you can communicate it better than they can communicate their problem, they're automatically going to give you authority, and you're going to earn credibility in their mind for being able to solve that problem. So they're really interested. And then you add in the who, it's like another layer of credibility. And so after that, we move into the what. Now the what portion, so we got why, what, why, who, what. The what section is the history and or the science portion. So you could talk about this can kind of blend into the who a little bit if the history is your own personal history or the personal history that your guest is going to talk about. You can also talk about the history of the particular topic, which may be thousands of years, or it might be hundreds of years, or it might be the last several months. The history of this particular topic. If I'm talking about AI, for instance, I could talk about the history of AI since the 1950s as it was being discussed in sci-fi novels, and then we could talk about it like that. And then you could also do both history and science, or just history or science. And the science this is a great place to cite research. If you listen to Andrew Huberman or Dr. Andy Galpin, these are really great guys who go heavy on the science portion of this, and they're really big. But if you'll notice, they'll talk about the why. They may mention the who, but they've got so much credibility at this point that people already know who they are. And then they jump into the science, and they really geek out on that, right? But they still get into the how, which is what's coming next. So you can mention the science, you can mention the history. This also adds to the credibility for certain types of, for the really curious people like myself, and for the people who tend to follow me, the history and science is really good for them because they do want to know why. And for a more sophisticated listener and sophisticated learner, they're really going to want to know the science and history of things, because then they're the type of person who can apply that to multiple areas of their life instead of just this one thing we're talking about right now. And so that's the benefit of putting that in there too. You're gonna attract a more sophisticated learner or listener. And if your audience is not as sophisticated, you might want to keep the history and science a little bit shorter and go straight from why, who, a short little history, science, and then jump straight into the how. So for the more unsophisticated people who are learning on Instagram versus podcast and YouTube, that's probably going to be the case. Next section, fourth section, is the how. All right. So this is the specific steps that someone can take, right? This is step 1, step 2, step 3. This could be a process that you have. So as you can see here in this particular post, in this particular YouTube video, I am giving you the how pretty early. So my who was pretty short. Basically told you, hey, I built up some podcasts and all that kind of stuff, and this is my download numbers and so on and so forth. I kept my who short. The why is pretty short, and the how in this particular post is really long. And so when you're explaining the how, it can be a process. So mine is, and I named it, right? So you can name your process. I'm calling this the story stream structure. And then it's, the 5 steps. And so you can give people 5 steps, this or that. Now, if you're selling something, so if you're making a video for the purpose of getting someone to buy something for you, if there's a webinar or a video sales letter or something like that, then the first step of the how may be to sign up for my thing. And then after you sign up for my thing, these are the other steps you can expect to get afterwards. All right. So that's number 4, the how. That's fairly easy. And then the last section is what if. And so this is where you get to imagine the audience's questions and the things that they may be have an objection to. Well, my situation's different. And so you can imagine, and after you post a lot and you get some feedback from the audience, you learn who they are and you learn what kind of excuses they may have, what objections they may have. If you've ever been done any sales training, there's always the part of the sales call that is objection handling is what it's called. It usually happens near, after there's some questions, there's a little bit of presenting about what you have to offer. And then the person goes, I don't have the time. I don't have the money. I don't have, the technical ability or whatever it is. They have their objections. Or, what if I'm just getting started? Or what if I've been doing this for a long time? So you plan all this out. So the last thing you do is you plan all the objections, the potential objections that someone could have. Now, if you're interviewing somebody, this gives you a lot of ammo for questions as you roll through it. If you're doing a solo podcast, you may find yourself handling the objections ahead of time if you're just riffing like I am now. And then you can always get to the bottom. You could always get the what if and then make sure you address that there at the end. And if you do a really good job, then people are going to get a lot out of that conversation. So that's the 5 sections. That's the 5 steps. You sit down before the show and you write down why, and then you do at least 3 bullet points. You don't have to write a whole script, just 3 bullet points. The who, 3 bullet points. The what, 3 bullet points. The how, 3 bullet points. The what if, 3 bullet points. You can do more. If you want to do more, you can do more. But if you do 3 of each, you're going to have a pretty good beat on how your show is going to roll, and you're going to be really prepared for it. Now, if you're having guests, I've planned the show with guests before. We have some time beforehand. We map it out. Maybe we do a call before they get to the studio. Maybe we do it in the studio right beforehand. And so I did that with guests. I did it when I had no guests and it was just me and co-hosts. I do it now. I actually write up an entire newsletter, and then I make a video based on that newsletter. So if you're on my email list, you'll be getting the written newsletter on Tuesdays, and you'll be getting the videos on Thursdays. And so I'm actually really hashing everything out before I record this video. So I'm very clear on what it is that I'm talking about. So what I found is now when I conduct interviews, when I'm doing a podcast and I'm interviewing somebody, I naturally just run through the why. I'm interviewing someone who's like, what are the benefits that someone could get from the conversation or the thing you're an expert on? Oh, tell me about who you are. What's your experience with this particular thing? And then I move into the what, like history and science questions. And then I move into like how, and I make sure that we hit the how, because one of the rules I've developed about podcasting is the listener has to be able to walk away with something that they can take action on that's going to improve their life. All right. That keeps them coming back. That's why I'm here. I'm here so that you can improve your life in some way. You can do the same thing for other people. So over time, I actually don't need to do prep before a show nearly as much. I don't have to map it out, but I did it 100 times before I got to where it became an automatic and habitual way of carrying on a conversation in public. So that's my story stream structure. I'm glad you stuck around for the whole video. If you want to dig into more things like this, this is just one little piece of education that I have. Of course, I only make a video a week. If you want to dig in and go deeper with me, you can check the link in the description. Go to the Coach Flow community. In the Coach Flow community, I do a weekly call. I have some education, especially if you're a coach. This really applies to coaches out there. We are basically creating AI-assisted coaching businesses. And so AI is coming online. It's revolutionizing everything. And so what we're doing is we're getting together as a community, and we're sharing what's working as things emerge and new technologies come out week by week. So make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and go check out the Coach Flow community. And obviously you can always go to my blog, bledsoe.life. Make sure you're on my newsletter. See y'all next time.